want to, hang on just one second, it looks like it started. Wonderful. Okay, welcome everyone to today's webinar. Today we have a post-deployment webinar that's coming to us from work that's been done in Yemen. It was a social behavior change deployment to support ADRA in Yemen, and that's what we would like to discuss today. Looking forward to a fruitful discussion and share information on this. Before we get started, I would like to mention a couple of things. First, I've already mentioned that we are recording the webinar today, just so that you're aware. And this is so that we can share it with others, as not everyone can join. As you know, the timing is quite challenging with all the different time zones that we want to accommodate. If you can keep yourselves on mute, that's great. At the time when if you want to say anything, first, while we're going through the presentation, if you want to type your questions in the chat box, or questions or comments, input, whatever, in the chat box, and then later, towards the end of the webinar, if you want to unmute yourself, you will be able to say those questions if you choose to. As I mentioned while we were waiting, if everyone can please write your name, your position, your organization, the country that you're in the chat box to introduce yourselves, that'd be great. Please, not just a hi, because we only have the name that you're showing on the in the Zoom, which isn't always full, so it's not always telling us very much. So otherwise, two other quick points. Well, at the end of the webinar, we do request that everyone can fill out a quick, very short evaluation of today's webinar. This gives us some important feedback on how to improve the webinar series. Ben right now is going to be sharing that link in the chat box right now. Please go ahead and open it, because you'll have it accessible now, and then you can minimize it so that you can do it at the end of the webinar. Okay, with that said, I'm going to go ahead and start, but just first, just a quick check. Can everyone hear me all right? Okay, good, great. All right, so let's start. Okay, so for today's webinar, I'm just going to quickly run over the things we'll touch upon. First, just a quick introduction and objectives of the webinar, a very short overview of what the TechRRT is, a background to the deployment, an overview of the deployment, an overview of the SBC strategy that was developed during the deployment, some progress since the deployment has taken place, and a little bit of learning from the process of developing the strategy, the SBC strategy. Finally, and hopefully the richest part of our time together today, is going to be the questions and the discussion. We are very happy to take questions and comments at any time. Please just type them in the chat box so that you don't forget them, and that will be the basis of our discussion as we wrap up the presentation and go into more open discussion. But we do like it to be an active time. We've blocked out an hour and a half for that reason, to be able to have the discussion and kind of throw around ideas, brainstorm if we want to, whatever it is. If it's a less active webinar, most likely it'll take only maybe an hour, but this depends on all of us. Okay, so moving on, the introduction. First, the objectives of the webinar. This is in fact the objectives of the webinar series in general when we do post-deployment webinars. It's just to foster discussion on the situation in country and to share information about TechRRT deployments that take place. Also, and this is really an important part, it helps to improve follow-up of the work that's been started in deployments. We have short deployments that are usually 6 to 8 weeks long, and it's just an injection of energy, we could say. And we like to see that in the best case scenario, that work is continued forward in a way that benefits a much greater number of people than what the advisor has time to touch upon while they're in country. So this is a really important factor for us. Today, I'm facilitating the webinar. My name is Andy Kendall. I'm the TechRRT Program Director. We've got a couple of presenters. One is Jason Brooks. He's the Senior Technical Advisor for Water, Sanitation and Hygiene for ADRA International. We've got Amgad. Amgad, I'm not going to pronounce your surname. Anis, I'm sure I've said it wrong. I apologize. He is the Senior Meal Officer from ADRA Yemen, a very active person during this whole deployment and in the follow-up after. And Ben Allen, who was the SBC advisor during that undertook the deployment as a TechRRT consultant at that time. You'll see in a minute that he's joined us to be a Deputy Program Director since. So quickly, what is the TechRRT? Well, first you'll see just down below, it actually stands for the Technical Rapid Response Team. It's a nutrition technical rapid response mechanism that provides technical support, whether remote or in-country, for improved nutrition programming. That means that we can do deployments, or we can support remotely to improve the technical quality and the scale and reach of response. We are a consortium that was founded in August of 2015, International Medical Corps in the lead, with Action Against Hunger and Save the Children as our very close consortium partners. We have funding from USAID. They've been since the very beginning when we started to undertake this work, and then more recently we have had Irish Aid and CEDA come on board to support us, which is very welcome. We work in close collaboration with the Global Nutrition Cluster and UNICEF, and we are within the new Global Technical Assistance Global Technical Assistance Mechanism for Nutrition, sometimes called GTAM for short. If you haven't heard about it and want to learn more, feel free to reach out and we can tell you more. Okay, so before I hand over, I would like to just mention a few things that were special about this deployment that is worth highlighting. First, this is an individual agency request, and I want to just make it, from the beginning, when the TechRRT started, we were doing deployments only to support collective requests. That means for the nutrition community in general in any particular country or a group of agencies together. We shifted that to be able to support individual agency requests as long as it's to improve the technical quality or scale and reach of the response. And this was one of our first deployments of such kind. In fact, we haven't had very many. In this case, it's to an international NGO, but we are more than happy and really seek to have deployments to support local and national organizations. This deployment was a multi-sectoral deployment. It covered nutrition, but also health and WASH. And this was something that we were very keen to do more, as we know that nutrition is a product of the outcome of lots of different aspects of people's lives that we're not able to put into one sector alone, like we tend to do in our responses. This is SBC in an emergency setting. We've done other SBC deployments in emergencies, but I think the reason I wanted to highlight this is that lots of people have trouble understanding how can we do social behavior change during an emergency. You can't do it then, it takes too long. But in fact, there are some important things that can be done, and in some cases it's the heart of how to make a big difference and an impact on the emergency. I'm just going to give the example of Ebola and handshaking I'm sure in DRC as well, but West Africa in particular, during that response, that was a critical part of programming the emergency. In this case, this Yemen ADRA deployment for social behavior change was really trying to really put people in the center of the programming, and I think that's essential, and I think we need to be thinking about that more in all of our programming. Okay, I'm going to stop talking there, and I'm going to hand over now to Jason to present the next few slides. Over the course of the discussion today, we will be bouncing back and forth between some different people. So, so as I mentioned them earlier, we've got Jason, we've got Amgad, and we've got Ben. Over to you, Jason.
Hi everyone, and greetings from Silver Spring, Maryland here in the US. Just want to make sure that you can hear me okay first.
Jason, we can hear you loud and clear. Thank you.
Great. So just a little bit of background. My contribution will be brief and much less important than those that are working directly on the ground. And first of all, a big thanks to TechRRT and Ben. This has been a fairly lengthy process. And you know, as Andy was saying, that an individual agency deployment was new to TechRRT, and it has some interesting characteristics. In mid-2017, ADRA launched the next round in a succession of OFDA and emergency food security programs funded in Yemen. This deployment was called SALA on the OFDA side and FADL on the FFP side. And together, these were integrated programs: WASH, agriculture, food security, livelihoods, early recovery of market systems, with including nutrition and food vouchers. And the senior staff from ADRA Yemen and the managerial and technical backstop specialists met together in Amman at that time. It was during the summer, and developed a detailed implementation plan for both projects, SALA and FADL together. And it was during this week of meetings that the need for developing and kind of retrofitting the SBC strategy into the ongoing activities was discussed as a way to further ensure achieving critical results. And I wanted to reinforce what Andy said. There's a perception that what can be done in SBC is very limited in emergencies. And I would counter that any project that has objectives, that there are behaviors among participants that are essential to achieving those objectives, and that means SBC is always important. So during those meetings, summer 2017, a point person on staff was asked to explore a way forward, and after the meetings, the exploration began sort of a search. ADRA had worked in the past with the designing for behavior change approach and a number of country programs. So we reached out to some individuals from TOPS, Bonnie Kittle, Claire Boswell, and IMC was suggested as a source for potential experts. We also learned that IMC would be conducting a barrier analysis in Yemen in the near future with a nutrition cluster. So we were put in contact with Esther Bousquet, who acquainted us with the TechRRT and its programs manager, Andy, who you've already heard from. The fit with TechRRT's focus on nutrition, WASH, and SBC was an ideal fit for ADRA's objectives of ensuring that its emergency work in Yemen was not only layered, but also working strategically to change behaviors, even in the short-term context of emergency programming. So from around 2017, we began serious talks with TechRRT, which, after some bumps and turns along the way, some renewal of funding to our original SALA and FADL programs, which were called MONER and ELAF, this resulted in an ambitious but doable terms of reference, and Ben Allen's travel to Yemen in early 2019. And you can imagine all sorts of issues, having people travel to HR, visas, schedules, and some of that accounts for the fairly long lead up to the deployment. It's not everybody that's prepared to go and work in the context of Yemen as a specialist consultant. So we're really grateful to Ben and the great work that he did. I know the team really enjoyed working with him. So today, this is our chance to share with all of you the process, the gains to date, and the plans for the immediate future. And really, that's my limited contribution here. And really, I'm going to turn it back over to both the TechRRT team, but also to our ADRA Yemen colleagues who were the essential component here. They're the ones working in the field. They're the ones identifying the key behaviors that are important to the objectives. And I just want to give them credit where credit is due. You'll be hearing from MGAD, but he represents a large and excellent team in Yemen. So back over to you, and thank you for all of you for being in attendance today.
Okay, thank you, Jason. Hello, everyone. This is Amgad from Yemen. So we will be talking about the situation in Yemen and how ADRA is intervening there. So as you know, Yemen, according to the humanitarian needs overview of 2019, 79% of the people in Yemen need assistance to meet their basic needs. And according to the latest IBC conducted on December 2018, the majority of people in Yemen are food insecurity and have an IBC phase 3 and more, and the malnutrition is spread in the country. The malnutrition is caused by food security, inadequate IYCF practices, and insufficient water sanitation and hygiene. And 55% of the population don't have any access to improved water sources, and only 51 health facilities of Yemen are fully functional. So that's an overview or the context of Yemen. So for ADRA is participating to meet the needs of the people in Yemen since 1995, and its operation and it's covering the most of governorates in Yemen, as highlighted in green in the map. And in 2019, ADRA started 2 new projects funded by USAID, and they are considered the biggest projects in Yemen. These projects covers 7 governorates in the south and north in Yemen. Those are highlighted in dark green in the map. And through these 2 projects, 10,000 households will receive food vouchers for 12 months, and 90 water sources will be rehabilitated to provide clean water to people. Also, 50 fixed health facilities and 5 mobile clinics are supported to provide health and nutrition services to all people in the catchment area. So ADRA Yemen now is planning to expand in the other governorates of Yemen in 2020 to cover and to support the people there with health, nutrition, wash, and livelihood activities, also education and protection support. So that's for Yemen, and also for ADRA. So for the deployment, the deployment took place for 2 months. It started on January 7th to the 7th of March. The main objectives of the deployment was to identify relevant behaviors that save lives in the current context of Yemen, and also to build the capacity of staff to conduct formative research like barrier analysis to determine the determinants that of the key behaviors, and also design behavior change plans. Also, one of the deployment objectives was to develop a strategy and action plan also support the Yemen team with the documentation of barrier analysis, strategy, action plan, and learning report, and also train the Yemen team on the rollout of the SBC strategy and action plan. And today we'll focus on the strategy and the learning report. So the deployment took place. The deployment will be the strategy will be implemented in the 7 governorates currently supported by the 2 projects funded by USAID, and the barrier analysis also conducted in 6 districts highlighted in yellow in the map in the south of Yemen. So for the activities, the main activities of the deployment were building the capacity of staff on the barrier analysis, including the design of methodology, collecting the data, and also developing strategy and action plans. Also the deployment activities are developing the SBC strategy and action plan. And after the deployment, there was a finalization of the strategy and action plan and barrier analysis reports. And we have also webinar for the HR, and this webinar today for the external parties. That's it for the deployment, and we have now Ben will be talking about the strategy.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Amgid. So yeah, as Amgid said, today there are various elements, components to the deployment, but today we're going to focus on the strategy and the learning side of it, which was detailed in a learning report. And those will effectively be the 2 sections that we're going to lead today. So the strategy that we ultimately ended up developing covers 6 different behaviours. They are listed here. Those in red were the ones for which we conducted formative research during the deployment. Those that are in black the strategy is based on the formative research findings from barrier analysis that were conducted by the nutrition cluster in 2018. So all the data from the 6 barrier analyses contribute to the strategy that we developed for ADRA Yemen. So those behaviours are, as you can see here: mothers of children 0 to 59 months wash hands with soap at the 5 critical points each day. And mothers of children seek care a maximum of 24 hours after 3 episodes of diarrhea. And then those, so obviously a wash-related one and a health-related one, and then the remaining 4 are nutrition-related. Pregnant women eating an extra meal each day during pregnancy. Mothers of newborns initiating breastfeeding within 1 hour of giving birth. Mothers of children aged 0 to 6 months exclusively breastfeed their child for the first 6 months. And mothers of children aged 6 to 23 months give them food from at least 4 of the 7 food groups each day. So the results of those barrier analyses were, like I said, used to inform the strategy. And I think it's pertinent that we go over a few of those key findings. We've dedicated 1 slide to each barrier analyses. Evidently, there were a number of more findings that came out, but we thought we'd highlight those that were most important today. And also you'll notice that on some of the slides, some of the findings are in bold, and those are the findings that are not knowledge related. And they're related to different aspects. For example, the first one here for hand washing, the availability of a suitable location to wash hands makes it easier to perform the behaviour, washing hands at the 5 critical times. And the availability of soap and water makes it easier. So as you can see, these two are access related, whereas the following two are knowledge related. Mothers are often not aware that washing hands by soap prevents diarrhea, and hand washing is considered a waste of water and money. So those are the 4 most interesting / most important coming from that barrier analysis. And then from the health-seeking research, we found that non-doers believed that husbands disapproved of seeking care, and that the lack of availability of transport and money for travel made it difficult to perform the behaviour. And thirdly, that parents were expected to treat children with diarrhea. So that obviously not an access-related finding, but more of a social norm-related finding. And finally, mothers who are aware of the seriousness of diarrhea were more likely to seek treatment.
Oh.
And I'm good?
Yes. So for the third behavior, which is the immediate breastfeeding, is the main findings of the barrier analysis were access to support, whether professional and non-professional for mothers, makes it easier to do the behavior, and also mothers who understand and realize the seriousness of if the children don't get colostrum, are more likely to initiate breastfeeding within 1 hour of childbirth. Yes.
Okay, thanks, I'm good. And yeah, so now if we look at as I said before, these findings are from the barrier analyses conducted by the nutrition cluster in 2018. So the behaviour here was pregnant women eating an extra meal during pregnancy each day. So they found during that barrier analysis that having access to food made it easier to perform the behaviour. Having enough time made it easier to perform the behaviour. And thirdly, non-doers believe that eating more makes pregnancy and delivery more difficult. And doers believe that better health, growth and immunity, for example, of the baby was an advantage of performing this behaviour. And then on to the exclusive breastfeeding behaviour. So exclusive breastfeeding between 0 and 6 months. We found that if there was no stress at home, it made it easier for mothers to perform this behaviour. The good health of the mother made it also easier to perform the behaviour. And the need to work outside of the home made it more difficult. Those are in bold because they are non-knowledge related findings. And then the lack of knowledge on an exclusive breastfeeding made it more difficult for mothers. And breast milk being free and ready made it easier for mothers. And finally, the lack of access to support for exclusive breastfeeding made it much more difficult for mothers to perform the behaviour. And finally, onto this last, the 6th of the behaviours, the complementary feeding. So eating food from at least 4 out of the 7 food groups each day for children ages 6 to 23 months. The availability of food made it easier. The lack of time made it much harder. The good growth and immunity that came from performing the behaviour is an advantage, and it was difficult to get support to give 4 out of the 7 food groups per day. And finally, the child being sick or not having an appetite made it more difficult. So just for those who are unfamiliar with the barrier analyses process, these findings from each of the 6 barrier analyses through through structured questionnaires with mothers, the priority group who perform these behaviours, were used to directly inform not only the messaging included in the SBC strategy, but also the strategies, the various interventions and approaches themselves, which we're going to look at in a little bit. So maybe bear in mind some of these key findings when considering the activity, the interventions and the approaches that we have chosen for the strategy. Okay, Amged, over to you.
Yes, so for the target groups of the strategy, for all the 6 behaviors are classified into 3 groups. So we have here the priority and secondary groups, and also we have the influencing groups. The priority and secondary groups are those who are doing the behaviors, and the influencing groups are those who affect the doers, affect the people who do the behaviors on doing the behaviors itself. So we have for the priority groups, we have pregnant and lactating women, and also we have mother of children 0 to 23 months. For the secondary groups, we have mothers of children 24 to 59 months for the hand washing and also healthcare seeking. And also we have women of childbearing age. For the influencing groups, we have here husbands, because husbands always influence the mothers when relating to any expenses, like buying a soap for the hand washing. And also we have here the community leaders who influence the parents and the fathers also, including the religious leaders like imams in our case. And we have also here the older women who influence mothers with some behaviors like breastfeeding. And we have here also the health unit work. Okay, Ben.
Great, thanks, Amged. So the next 5 slides, so the first 2 are dedicated to the key principles for the strategy. So overarching principles and understandings that underpin all of the whole strategy itself. And then we're going to look at 3 slides which detail the specific interventions that we decided, and Amged is going to take us through those interventions. So yes, the principles, there are 10 or so. Firstly, that it is participatory. So this is not only during the conception and the design, so the formative research through engaging with community leaders to inform community members, I should say, to inform the strategy, but also when building village level approaches, village level strategies, and it's critical that the ADRA and the team involve community leaders, household heads, and mothers in the specific details of village level strategies. So the SBC strategy really promotes that. And secondly, behaviour-centred approach, including communication and non-communication approaches. And this is the reason why we highlighted the difference in the different findings from the formative research, because typically I think it's fair to say that social behaviour change activities, awareness raising and the like, are typically sort of directed at communication related strategies. So doing focus groups, or doing group discussions, or doing household visits, targeting improving the information and understanding of community members. However, the strategy promotes both that and non-communication approaches, whether that be, for example, supporting communities to build hand washing stations in their households, because we found that the lack of hand washing stations was an important determinant for whether the hand washing behaviour was performed or not. So a behaviour-centred approach including both communication and non-communication approaches. Thirdly, a long-term post-crisis view, community ownership and integration with the health system. Obviously, in a context like Yemen, where local health structures are weak, this is more of a challenging principle to fulfill. Yet we felt that it was important that when the ADRA team worked at health centre and village level, that it was very obvious and it was very clear during those interactions that the work that they're doing to deliver these behaviour change strategies, the activities themselves, should be done with a long-term view in mind, so that if the ADRA team supported a mother-to-mother support group in a village, for example, that the intention would be that after ADRA leave one day, that the community would be able to continue those activities, that mother-to-mother support group, with potentially the help from the health system and from the local health centre. And there are other interventions which are more relevant to the health centre, and others which are more relevant to the community, but some that obviously were very much connected between the two. And fourthly, an individual approach at household, village and health unit levels. We felt that the conditions didn't allow for mass media approaches, or that the mass media approaches, given the context, would, in order to be effective, would require huge amounts of resources and may even not be appropriate given the conflict / post-conflict context in which we're working. Therefore, we decided that an individual approach targeting household level, but also village level, so village leaders, and like Amgad mentioned, religious leaders, and that health unit as well. Targeting mothers when they visit the health unit. That is not to say that the community aspect is neglected by this strategy, and that's why we have included the fifth principle, community mobilization, to facilitate social change. So we wanted to make sure that activities that not only targeted individuals, but also created some changes in social norms and changes in community understandings related to these behaviours were pursued, with like engagement with community actors, but also publishing of posters and distribution of flyers at a community level to all both the priority, secondary and influencing groups. Okay, well, if there are any questions on that, because I feel that often that is not super clear, then we can discuss later on, so please do raise that. And sixthly, the prioritization of quality over quantity. Obviously, the ADRA and many organizations will have a target of X amount of villages or households to address, and it may not be that the budget allows for all the different aspects of an SBC strategy to be implemented in every single village, but the strategy promotes the target of a smaller number of villages, for example, over a larger number, but with all the different elements of the strategy. Because as we felt that we're going to see the interventions in a minute, but the simultaneous activities at household, health centre and community level were important. And if that's not possible in all of the villages, the targeting villages, then we felt that it was better to do it in a smaller number of villages to allow for that multi-layered and high quality social SBC interventions. And Then focus on quality of CHV and health worker communication. This is something that we had a couple more slides on that we'd love to go into more detail, and it is much more detailed in the strategy, but we don't have the time today, but we can discuss if that's interesting to those on the call. Focusing on quality communication between the CHV, the health worker, and the mother. Typically, historically, communication is quite didactic and one-directional, but the strategy promotes a much more two-way understanding approach to communication. That is a really, really important aspect, and something which I think was more one element of all of this that was more novel to some of the ADRA team. And there's the strategy promotes specific training on communication approaches for program staff and health workers. And moving on quickly, the last two different sector and program activities will be integrated. That's very straightforward. That obviously ADRA, like many organisations, have WASH and health and nutrition departments, but this promotes an integration with the activities, the social behaviour change activities for those three different sectors. For example, using volunteers at community level to deliver messages via house-to-house visits. There would not be a volunteer used for WASH messaging and then a volunteer used for health and nutrition messaging, but rather one volunteer used for messaging related to health, nutrition, and WASH. There are many other different examples of how of integrating activities. That's just one. And finally, targeting multiple contacts, parent focus, and using peer support. So I mentioned the multiple contacts earlier. That could be mother, that could be community level, and that could be health workers. And parent focus, that's pretty straightforward, is just to make the point that we don't neglect fathers in all of this. As Amged mentioned, fathers are a key influencing group, particularly when it comes down to any monetary requirements for performing the behaviour. So if we're not targeting those who hold the purse strings, then we're not going to facilitate the mother's ability to be able to perform that behaviour. And using peer support, as Amged is going to explain in a while. We felt that using peer supports and mothers, their friends, older women in their family, that we would be able to influence the behaviour change. Older women particularly were found to be important influencers when it comes to breastfeeding. So if we don't target them, then again, we won't be able to facilitate the mother being able to perform the breastfeeding behaviours. Okay, Amged, and Amged now on to the interventions that the strategy suggests.
Okay, thank you, Ben. So for the interventions of the strategy, they will be conducted at 3 levels: at individual or household level, and also will be conducted on community level and health unit level. So let's start with the individual and household level. We have here the first 2 interventions are mother to mother and father to father support groups. These groups provide a safe and comfortable spaces where participants can ask and discuss freely, and also these groups will be targeting the women and their husbands, so that they will promote doing the behaviors. The groups will be facilitated by the community health volunteers, and will be a 12-week program addressing the core topics and supporting mothers to practice behaviors and fathers to be involved and engage in the well-being of children. So the group activities the group supports, the support groups, I'm sorry, will include the storytelling, demonstration, like using models for breastfeeding, and also will include site visits to positive deviants. And this will be discussed in a bit. We have also the house-to-house visits, which will be also led by the community health volunteers to support the parents participating in the support groups, but will be more in-depth support. The each couple, the mother and father will receive at least one visit from the CHV, and the visit will be a good chance for the community volunteers to build trust and communicate with the parents and demonstrate care. Well, the house-to-house intervention will be also used as a monitoring for monitoring purpose to monitor the level of change in doing the behavior among the families participating in the support groups. We have here the fourth intervention of the household level, which is the positive deviant families, and this idea was based on that every community have individuals who have uncommon but successful behaviors, which avoid them to be affected to the same risk of the other community members. And also that the fact that every community has a solution to overcome its challenges. So this approach will ensure that these uncommon activities or successful behaviors are shared with the group of people participating in the support groups, and so will be discussion and will be like a life example. So those are the interventions that will be conducted at the individual or household level, and also we have interventions will be conducted at the community level. So here we have the older women and community leader groups. These groups will be targeting those influencing people who affect the behaviors of the targeted groups, and we have here the older women. So the same as the mother to mother and father to father groups. These groups will be led by community health volunteers, but the program will be quite shorter. So, for example, maybe one session per week and only for 4 weeks. So older women, maybe the name will be modified to show more experience and more wisdom and strength. For the community leader groups, this will be targeting those leaders who influence men, particularly within villages, but also this group will be used to test the interventions, the messages, and also will be used to identify the positive deviants. So we have also here the sharing messages during public meetings. Public meetings will be utilized to share key messages. Public meetings like Friday prayers for men, and also like weddings or other community or other meetings for women, where community volunteers will be sharing the key messages that target the behaviors. And also we have here posters for public spaces, health units, and households. So posters will be served as reminders for the house, for the target groups for doing the behaviors. And also we have sharing the same messages via text message or WhatsApp groups. So all the target groups will be invited to share their numbers so that the team will share with them messages via their phone as text messages or like pictures using WhatsApp application, as these messages will be used as reminders. And also this intervention will be conducted because that ADRA already has such ADRA already has such mechanism to inform or to send messages to staff, like for security reasons, security warnings or other notifications. And also we have here the last intervention for the community level, which is the SBC hotline. And this will be like someone specialist for someone specialist with the IYCF will be providing advices to any of the mothers in the target groups as asking for any inquiries about IYCF or health and hygiene. So that's for the community level interventions. And we have the last two interventions, which will be conducted at the health unit level. So we have here health unit, we have fixed and mobile health units. So this will be also, so for the health unit level will be conducted at individual and groups also. So the health workers will be conducting counseling sessions to mothers, pregnant and lactating women. And also here we have for the mobile health team, they will do the same as the fixed health unit, but they will be conducting these services or these interventions in the villages. So that's all for the types of interventions that will be used when conducting the strategy. So far, the strategy will be implemented once the SBC specialist will be hired, and this is planned to be done in August. Currently, there is a discussion with an SBC expert to take place. And also, currently the team already identified the messages based on the barrier analysis, and they are currently used. They currently use through home visits and also during the distribution sites. So that's for the deployment.
Amgid, maybe I could just, before you move on to the first slide of the learning, we're already getting loads of different questions in the chat box, which is brilliant. But maybe we can still try to answer them, but maybe just to emphasize that this strategy has yet to be implemented. This is the strategy that was designed during the deployment based on the formative research. But as Amgid just mentioned, due to the lack of available the correct profiles, the strategy has not yet been driven forward, and therefore a lot of these interventions ADRA don't yet have experience with. Just to bear that in mind for any future questions. Okay, great. So yeah, like we said at the beginning, we're going to focus on the strategy, the strategy that was designed, and also some of the learning coming from the process because an important part of this for this deployment for ADRA was to make sure that any interesting outcomes, any lessons that came from it were able to be captured and inform any future ADRA program, international programs who wish to develop an SBC strategy like this. We only have half an hour left, so I am going to rattle through these 3 slides quite quickly, especially as we really want to get to some of these questions many questions that have been answered. Okay, great. So firstly, the engagement of staff at all levels. We found this was really a really effective outcome. I was able to work with everybody from the field officers, so the ADRA guys that go out into the field to support distributions and household visits, and all the way up to the I forget Nazi. I forget his precise title, but he's the head of office in the Aden region. So that was really important, particularly as SBC and behaviour change approaches and formative research were quite new to some team members. The timing of the formative research and the strategy, this was quite good, we felt, because the 2 very large programs that Jason mentioned at the beginning were funded, but they'd yet to be kicked off. In fact, the kickoff workshop happened during the deployment in Amman, and this meant that when we were doing the formative research, doing the training, that the field officers, the technical staff, obviously they were busy, but they weren't busy yet implementing activities. So that meant that they had more time to be able to engage in the process. Support of a consultant. This was something identified by the team as a really important learning process, part of the process, by having a consultant, myself, to facilitate the process and also to bring an outside perspective added value to the process. And the importance of having an SBC specialist in place. As we've mentioned, this SBC specialist was not identified at the time of the deployment, and this was not through lack of trying. I supported the ADRA team in Yemen and in Maryland to try and identify someone, but that was not possible during the deployment. However, I believe discussions have already started with someone to support the ongoing SBC work. And next slide, please. Yes, and as I've mentioned a number of times, SBC ideas, concepts, are quite new to some staff members. However, there is still experience in SBC, and we found it was important to acknowledge that. Things, awareness raising, household visits, focus groups, these types of activities, which may not be conducted in a way that the strategy intends, but it's important to value those things and to demystify, if you like, SBC, because the ADRA team have already worked in Aden for a number of years and have experience that is important to recognise. And the SBC is not all new. Clearly, however, yes, this is an important point. It's clearly distinguished between SBC approaches and activities and awareness raising activities. Typically awareness raising, as I mentioned before, just delivering messages, delivering information to community members. However, as we've mentioned, SBC approaches are based on formative research and also involve a more two-way communication process and non-communication activities as well. Following on, yes, we did some FG focus group discussions after the barrier analyses. Previous experience with barrier analyses have shown that after the findings, there have been questions about various details, like if the barrier analysis found that yes, there were social norms that affected this particular behaviour, the barrier analysis doesn't, the strict methodology doesn't necessarily say what those social norms are. Therefore, we conducted focus groups following the barrier analyses to get more details on those findings, and also more details to inform more nuanced messaging. And that's not something, as far as we know, that's typically done with following barrier analyses, but following this experience is recommended. Yes, and point 8, yeah, we were, because of the timing of the eventual timing of the deployment, we were able to use the BA data that we actually collected in the training on behavior change, which was really important, which meant that the technical staff were able to do the analysis of the BA data in order to inform the strategy with the actual BA data from the BAs, rather than using a sample or dummy data set. And for integration of sectors, yeah, this was something that we emphasized from day one, and with the 3 different teams, the nutrition, health, and wash teams, and we all worked together on all the behaviors. When, for example, when we had in the strategy workshop, we had wash, nutrition, and health people working in groups to develop activities and ideas for particular behaviors. Yes, and focus on communication skills. I mentioned that already as far as the principles to the strategy go. That communication skills are critical in behavior change. And the next slide. And finally, yeah, and this speaks to some of the questions that have come through. One particular question that's come through. There's concern from the team of the ability to adopt all aspects of the strategy in all the villages, because, as someone's mentioned, there are quite a few different elements. And will the team have the resources and the ability to implement all those activities in all villages? We can address that in a little while. And finally, the importance of intensive and multi-layered SBC activities in individual villages. Yeah, we feel that in order to produce sustained behaviour change, the multi-layered approach of the different sort of contacts, if you like, that this SBC strategy promotes is important. And therefore, if a smaller number of villages need to be targeted in order to do that, then that should be prioritised over covering many villages. Right, so we've got, hello Andy, are you there?
Hello. Okay, so thank you, Ben. Thank you, Amgad, for the presentation, and Jason for your support at the beginning of the presentation. Super interesting. I think the quantity of questions that have come in demonstrates the interest in the work that's been done. So maybe we should jump right in, maybe with starting with some of the initial questions. I'm just going to go straight. Okay, from the first point, I'm actually going to allow, I don't know everyone's name, but there's somebody, B. Hines. Did you want to mention your question to start? Are you there?
Thank you so much. This was a fantastic presentation. Much appreciated. As I said, I'm delighted to see that husbands are included in the strategy. Would it be better for us to mention them as a priority along with the mothers rather than mere influencers? Is there a barrier to that, cultural or religious?
Go ahead.
Are you there? I'm good. You're still on mute. Okay, well, maybe I'll just say something about that. Yeah, thanks very much. So it's a very good point. Like, should husbands be priority? But I think there may be a good reason to treat them as priority. But I think the fact is that mothers play the most central role in the care of children, and therefore, for that reason, I think that they are treated as a priority. But as we said, particularly when it comes to resource issues, it's really important to engage husbands. Amgid, you're there.
Yes, that's right. So for the behaviors, so the behaviors are done by by mothers, and in the context of Yemen, husbands or only just influence not doing that behavior by themselves. So that's right then.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you both for the response. I'm going to, unless you say otherwise, I'm going to go on to the next question. Hope that your question's been well answered. Feel free to pop up if not.
Yes, it has. Thank you.
Great, okay. I'm going to go to the next question. Pet, I'm happy to see you. Do you want to go ahead and ask your question about the extent about the security situation?
Yes, good afternoon. I would like to ask you, to what extent has the security situation in the areas where ADRA operate influenced your choice of the SBC activities? Like, how big was the gap between what you would like to do, between the type of activities that you would like to implement, and between what is feasible given the security situation?
I'm good.
Yes, so security maybe restrict us to use the mass media in delivering messages, especially in the north of Yemen. South of Yemen is okay, but also needs more work, and it's easier and more accessible for communities to receive messages or interventions through community health volunteers. Hope that answers your question.
Great, okay. Well, thank you for that question. Sorry, the person who spoke before, everyone, when you say your question, would you mind introducing yourselves very briefly beforehand? I'm going to go back to the Heinz to ask the next question.
Yes, and thank you. I'm Brigitte Heinz, ADRA. My question here is an education sector to be part of the longer term vision, as is the health sector that was mentioned? You mentioned in terms of the long-term vision that you will engage the health sector. Is there any thoughts to the education sector? Is there one in Yemen? And what do we do?
Yeah, thanks very much. Yeah, there's a few questions on integration. So maybe it'd be worth including your question in relation to education. Maybe it'd be worth having a go at addressing some of those in one go. As far as education goes, I think it might be if someone from ADRA was able to interject on that afterwards, that would be much appreciated. The current ADRA activities in the country, well, for the strategy and the formative research, it was very much focused on WASH, nutrition, and health. That is not to say that some of the principles and the interventions in the strategy are not applicable to ADRA's other areas. And also, whilst during the deployment, we did have discussions with the agriculture and small business departments to see where behaviour change approaches could be applied. But this strategy is very much focused on WASH, nutrition, and health. But as I understand it, with the intention that in the future that those other areas of intervention in ADRA will be incorporated, or SBC approaches will be incorporated in them. as far as education goes, I don't, as far as I know, I don't think that ADRA are engaged in them. But is there anybody from ADRA who would like to talk about education in Yemen? Or Amgad, sorry, anybody, including Amgad, of course.
Yes. So it's because that education is not very prioritized now in Yemen. So the main focus in Yemen now is on the food security, livelihoods, wash and health interventions only. So ADRA is planning in 2020 to take part in also responding to some of the education need, but the focus currently now is only on those sectors that I mentioned.
Great, and someone asked about specific integration examples, and I think it's a brilliant question, and I think something a perennial challenge for humanitarians doing different interventions, so the idea that we already talked about. So Amgad mentioned in the interventions, such as the support groups and the house-to-house visits. The intention is that those support groups and those house-to-house visits would include nutrition, health, and WASH messaging. The phone approach, so the SBC hotline and the messages distributed via WhatsApp, it's intended that those would cover the three as well. Wherever there's any messaging, basically, so whether that's with the community leaders, such as the imams, whether that's with the support groups, the house-to-house visits, they would include messaging related to those three interventions. And also, it's really important to mention that although there are, of course, different individuals dedicated within ADRA, dedicated to those, as I say, at a management level, dedicated to those different areas. The challenge of the SBC specialist, the SBC role incoming, will be to ensure that that integration happens at village level with those interventions that I just mentioned. Obviously, the various technical individuals are specialists in their technical area, but the SBC specialists will hopefully be able to use those technical specializations and make sure that they are sort of convene and all influence the messaging, the various approaches at village level. And yeah, I think that will be a big challenge, not a challenge, but that will be a priority for them. Yes, and there was a mention of natural environment, health, natural environment, and climate change with regards to integration as well. Yeah, like I said, at the moment we're focusing, ADRA, the strategy, focusing on WASH, nutrition, and health. But that's not to say that these other elements, education, natural environment, climate change, shouldn't be integrated in the
Great, thank you, Ben, for combining all the questions that were related to integration. I think that was really helpful. Okay, before we go on to the next question that's in the chat box, I think that Samuel from IMC would like to contribute. Samuel, over to you.
Thank you so much, Auntie. Just to mention that in terms of mother support groups, already we have the Ministry of Health has agreed that we can implement the mother support groups. However, it is through the CHVs, actually, who are 99% of the CHVs are female. So it is very good approach. However, the challenge that we are facing, this is just a contribution from Yemen. However, the challenge we are facing is that these CHVs are also involved in many of the health wash activities, and so engaging them in this activity, again, it is not an easy venture. In addition, at the health facility, another challenge we are facing in terms of social behavior change is that the midwives that are female, that actually they are the ones that interact with mothers. In this context, a male cannot interact with the female at the health facility. We find out that there is only one female nurse midwife. So it becomes very hard for her, for example, to provide RICF individual counseling at this facility. So as International Medical Corps, what we have done, we have discussed with the GHO and the DHOs and agreed that we need to have an additional staff that will be focusing on RICF, focusing on meeting with the CHVs within the catchment areas and discussing all the social behavior change interventions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Samuel, for that input. Very interesting to hear how you guys are trying to incorporate social behavior change at that level. I'd like to go on to a little bit of a different track of questions. I think there's been some interest been expressed in the hotline as well as the WhatsApp activities. And so maybe I can put those questions over to you at once. One question about whether WhatsApp is it not restricted? Not exactly the same question, but regarding the hotline, what's the strategy for ensuring that someone's available to take these calls? Okay, over to you, Amgad and Ben.
Yeah, thanks very much. Yeah, the technicalities of both the SBC hotline, as it's preliminarily called, and the sharing of messages via WhatsApp are obviously important. And I'm going to let Amgad talk about it in more detail, but what's important to recognize here is that that ADRA Yemen Aden already has experience with with these kinds of channels. So there are some systems and numbers even already set up that the SBC strategy hopes to piggyback on. Amgad, maybe you can tell us more.
Yes, so we already have hotlines. We use them for the complaint and feedback, to receive complaint and feedback from the communities we serve. So we will use the same mechanism, but we will hire someone specialist with the IYCF and also the technical issues that I mentioned in the intervention presentation. And we will be like having a specific time, like from 8:30 to 4 or 4:30, and every day on the working days. So that's the same mechanism we use currently for the complaint and feedback. For the WhatsApp is used everywhere in Yemen, and it's not restricted. So it's easy and everyone can use it, especially in Yemen.
Yeah, and I think there was. I'd be interested to know what you think, Amgad. There was a question, I believe, about sharing of numbers and whether people the level of willingness for people to share their numbers in order to receive future the messaging that we're talking about. What do you think about that?
Yes, so for sharing numbers, I'm not sure that women in the same villages will have any problem with sharing their numbers with the sage fees living in the same area. But as I see in the chat box now, the coverage of the call services, it may not work in some places, but it will work in other areas.
Yeah, and maybe that's a good opportunity for me to link to another question that someone asked about implementation research and impact of the interventions. And as we discussed a lot with the Amged and the rest of the team, that some of these interventions are newer, some of them new, and some of them are not so new. And not only in terms of impact, but also in terms of the mechanisms required in order to deliver them are new to ADRA. Therefore, it's really important that these interventions and the multi-layered nature of the interventions at village level is piloted before doing it on a grand scale. So the first stage of implementing the strategy will be to select pilot villages in which to do it, and if necessary, test and use that use that to test the interventions. And but I must emphasize, and this is something that I've gone on about to the team there, so they're probably bored of me saying it, that it's important in order to cause sustained behaviour change, that all the interventions, including the hotline, the messaging, the support groups, the working with community leaders, are done simultaneously. And if that's not possible in, for example, 50 villages, then it should be focused in order to do that behaviour change on a smaller number. Yeah.
Great, thank you for that, Ben, and I'm good. Going on to another question, there's some questions about how many volunteers were you working with, and how did you get engagement with the volunteers to do this work? Can you comment on that?
I'm good.
Yes. So ADRA now, through our project, we have 50 health facilities, and we have about 250 community health volunteers working with us in supporting the people living in those facilities catchment area. So that's for the number of volunteers, and now I think because we will use the strategy in some of the areas that are out of the catchment area, maybe we will need to train and other community health volunteers. So it's for doing the strategy activities.
Okay, thank you for that input. I'm good. Okay, I'm very conscious of time. We're 3 minutes before we're supposed to close the webinar. So I think I'll just highlight one more question, if that works, for both of you and for all the participants. And as its last question, I'm actually going to go to one that's talking about the long-term vision that goes beyond the project's duration. What is the idea about what is the phase-out strategy, and to what extent are the local structures, for example, the health facilities, capable of following up on this work or some of this work? At the health unit level, the person who was talking said, I've not seen any support to strengthen the capacities of health facilities. Over to both of you.
Sorry?
Could you hear the question?
Sorry, I was muted. Sorry, Amged, go ahead. You started speaking.
No, I'm sorry. Can you repeat the question, because I could not hear it very well.
Yes, briefly, it's talking about the phase-out strategy and what extent the project and the strategy is looking to work with the local structures so that they're able to follow up on the work, for example, with the health facilities in particular.
I'm sorry, I could not understand it. Can someone explain here?
So I'm good. So basically, we talked a lot about the future of post ADRA, let's say, the future of the strategy. and whether and the intention to ensure that the activities that are led by ADRA at village level with community health volunteers are integrated and involve the staff and the structures at health facility level. But the question's more about the ability of those health facilities to be able to take on these activities.
Okay, so for the health facilities, and in most of the health facilities we are supporting, well, we don't think that we will have any problem with that, because as the interventions in the health facilities will be providing counseling sessions to PLWs, and that's currently done by midwives and also health workers working in that health facility.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, I'd be given that this is a very interesting, I mean, I think that's one more question I'm going to raise, just because it's a quick one, and I think it's worth highlighting that was asked. It's asking, how are you able to engage with fathers to participate in the father support groups, and what existing mechanisms or groups do you tap into, if any?
Okay, so for fathers, so we targeted fathers in our previous projects. We trained male community health volunteers to communicate with men in the same villages and delivering the same messages that we deliver through female community health volunteers to female to mothers. So this is, as Ben said, this is some of the activities are new for us, and maybe we can pilot that, and also maybe we can adjust if needed.
Ben, did you have anything that you wanted to add?
No, not on that. But yeah, actually, no, one small thing. Yeah, something that was identified. This applies to men and women, in fact. It was identified that Thursday afternoons or / evenings are often in Yemen dedicated to discussion, and it was highlighted that those could be very fruitful opportunities to be able to engage with fathers and or mothers in these issues. And I've just come to mind now, another one for fathers was what are referred to as, I believe Amgad can tell me otherwise, sports clubs. And they're at times, again, when men typically get together to discuss issues, sport or otherwise, I understand. And those could also be tapped into to engage them with these issues.
Yes, and maybe not only sport clubs, but it's like when as you said in the afternoon, when men sit together and discuss during when they chew cut. So as I also mentioned that our male community health volunteers use this time to communicate with male. So yes, it's
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Amgad and Ben, and thank you everyone who's contributed to questions. I apologize for those that we couldn't answer your question. There was just quite a lot that were asked. We could perhaps share the remaining questions in writing afterwards. So I'd like to go ahead and wrap up because I'm very conscious that we've already passed the time that we allocated. So I wanted to say thank you very much for joining the webinar. I know people are going to be popping off. Before you do, if you could quickly just connect to the evaluation that we have for the webinar. It literally will take you less than 5 minutes, and it is worth its weight in gold for us to be able to improve our webinars. And I wanted to thank everyone. I wanted to first thank the participants for joining. I hope that you've enjoyed our webinar today. And then I wanted to thank especially Amgad and Ben and also Jason for the presentation. I hope you found the webinar interesting, and thank you for attending and for the active participation. And I hope to see you on a future webinar at another time. Please do have a good evening, good day, good afternoon, depending where you are. Many thanks.